Yeah, so hi everyone. Let's hope this works properly. So this is the first time that we're doing one of these live streams. The idea here is to have a bit of a discussion about, the Cosmos launch, validator economics, and some of the other things going on. You should be able to submit questions in a chat. If not, maybe somebody can like DM me on Twitter and I'll figure out but if somebody's listening, then please try that. We're gonna have some more people joining in as well. But yeah, I would say let's get started with a quick round of introduction. So maybe Lorien, why don't you go first?
Sure. My name is Lorien Gabel from Figment Networks. We're based in Toronto, Canada. And like I think most of the people on this call have been head down recently on the recent Cosmos launch. And I'm looking forward to discussing people's views on that and where that may be going.
And maybe Hendrik?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Hendrik. I'm one of the co-founders of Certus One. We are a strongly security-focused validator, have started on Cosmos, just finished the launch successfully with all of you, and I'm looking forward to discuss how the network looks and how things have been going.
And yeah, Gautier?
Sure. Hello, so I'm Gautier, working at Tendermint for a year and a half now, also a contributor to Cosmos, obviously. And I'm also working on a validator called CastleNode. It's a smaller validator, but we are also very good on security. I'm very focused on this aspect of the operation. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
And finally, Chris?
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris. I operate the Chainflow validator. I'd also put myself in the smaller yet very dedicated validator category. And I've been part of the validator working group since it was formed back in October of 2017.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, so there should be some other people joining. I think Zaki also mentioned he was going to join, and Sunny potentially. But I thought it would be good to just sort of look back on, first of all, what happened. So the network's now 1 week old. We have 1 week of data before we had 0 data. So what are your main, what are your main takeaways and surprises so far? And, anyone feel free to jump in.
I would just quickly say overall, I think I'm surprised that it went as smoothly as it did, I would say overall. I think it may have been one of the first actually truly decentralized launches without, the foundation having most of the hash power and launching that way. So I think that's a bit of a surprise and also very encouraging. I think that's positive. I think my negative view would be that seems to be a fair amount of short-term thinking on something that's a long-term project, whether it's decentralization or voting power, etc. We're a week in. There's not exchanges yet. I think there's sort of a lot of discussion around changing some pretty fundamental aspects of the protocol, and yet it's super early. So I think that's kind of if I had to pick one good and one bad thing, that would be my sort of initial comments. But overall, wow. It went off. There hasn't been any huge technical problems. There was that little hiccup with someone overpaying in gas last night, but I don't think there's been any sort of huge problems with the network, which has been great, except for block 17 or something like that. So I think that's been great.
Okay, great. So I think you mentioned basically the short-term thinking that concerns you. Maybe that's something we can come back to and expand a little bit. But yeah, hey, welcome, Zaki. Thanks for joining us.
How's it going?
Yeah, so I think Zaki probably doesn't need much of an introduction. But anyway, still, I guess one of the challenging things with you is that, so you're basically representing a validator, the Tendermint team, and the Interchain Foundation all in one person.
No. Okay, so my goal with the Interchain Foundation is I'm trying to be minimize my involvement as rapidly as possible. I'm trying to get out.
Okay.
They keep pulling me back in, but I'm trying to get out.
So maybe for you the question, looking back at the launch, so we have 1 week of data.
But, yeah, I have no operational role at the Interchain Foundation.
Yeah,
at this point, they just ask for my advice, and if they task me to do specific things, I do them. But like the Interchain Foundation, like Ariane, Michael, Ethan, Jay are doing the Interchain Foundation stuff, not me.
Mm-hmm. So Zaki, from your perspective, what do you think went well about the launch, and what is something that surprised you?
Well, what went well is that this crazy gamble that I did, that I encouraged and like orchestrated, did not blow up in my face. Because the gamble of launch was, can we do launch distributed, and will we either end up on the Polychain Cosmos Hub or the Gautier Capital Cosmos Hub, or will we actually actually have like fairly distributed launch, and will we get to stability? Will the network halt? Like, all of these are risks that nobody else in the proof of stake space was willing to take. And I thought we could take them because of, all of the practice that we've been doing as a community over the last, year of distributed testnets. But obviously it was still a gamble. I'm also like totally shocked at how long it's taken for like a proposal to enable transfers to get in. Like, just utterly shocked.
Yeah, that is true. I also expected that somebody would make that pretty.
I was expecting it on day one. Like, I think I was like refreshing Hubble, like, every 10 minutes. I'm like, when is this going to happen?
And this is something that's not going to come from the Cosmos team or the Interchain Foundation, right? That would be something that has to be community initiated.
I think it's, my point of view on the whole Cosmos network is that there's not a lot of value to the network without the governance. The sovereignty of the network is really the root of its value, and the ability of the network to sort of negotiate with the world and like come to decisions. And so, I think, part of there were really two motivations from my point of view for not having transfers be enabled at launch. One was the risks of doing a decentralized launch and potentially not of going through of ending up in a state where a single validator controls more than 2/3 of the network, which was a risk during launch. The second was that basically, basically there is no value to this network without its ability to come to decisions. And so why don't we actually force that early, so that we start building the muscle memory around how to come to decisions. So,
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's from my point of view, like why it's so important that it comes from the community. Obviously, I've been talking to everyone who's been thinking about it, about providing like my best advice on what I think a good proposal looks like and all of that stuff. And the simple VC proposal looks is definitely and the way we find we do enable transfers will be the decision of this decentralized community that we have and the stakeholders in the network, and it will not be the rule of Zaki.
What about you guys, Hendrik, Gautier, or Chris? Do you guys have any major takeaway or surprises so far?
Yeah, I think we've also been surprised that it was running so smoothly from the beginning on. Okay, we've all been shocked in the beginning when the network was stopped, and yesterday at the Berlin launch party, also someone had a great costume about block 17. It was 17 with Jack's face glued on it. It was really great. So the only thing that I disliked about the launch and think didn't go so well was the fact that the audit for the Cosmos wallet for X Voyager was not finished yet, which made people use community distributed binaries, the Gaia CLI, and which made them sometimes not apply best practices. And we as validators had a lot to do to help them delegate. And I think that was a risk to the delegators and Cosmos Hub users' security. I think we could have done better on that and could have organized like ourselves better. But the great support that I've seen, and that probably the delegators have seen from the whole validator community in terms of tools being provided, great guides being provided, I think that was incredible. And I really loved how we solved this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this was another thing that a little bit surprised me and maybe caught me a little bit off guard, is I was sort of expecting the network to be a lot more unstable and less sort of ready for delegators to engage in the first week or two. And so, you know, I thought that there would be, you know, I thought that the timeline on the train running for the Voyager audits would be, you know, all of these audits are just like the timeline, the lead time on planning an audit is like we sign audit contracts in like, we signed audit contracts for now in like December and January, or like, yeah, December basically. Was like when we started up all, like when these audit engines have to be started. And like, so it's like the lead, so like audits are not a nimble, agile thing. They're an incredibly difficult, they're an incredibly challenging thing to like coerce into existence. You know, like sort of stage managing all of these audits with launch and all of the other things that take time has obviously been a huge challenge.
Yep.
I think
oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I would also echo that. I was happily surprised at how smoothly everything went. Going back to one of the first validator launches when there were 5 or 6 of us, you know, in a room trying to do it together, remembering how tough that was, coming to now feels like tons and tons of progress has been made. I think one of the things that gave me some hope that it could work, even though I voiced some concerns about the audit too, is that when we first started those Genesis files with, you know, the Genesis time, and people were able to just start up their systems, and those systems came online, it almost seemed like a miracle in a way. So seeing that work that time gave me some confidence that it would work this time, but I was still pleasantly surprised to see that it was pulled off, especially because it seems like people emerged that weren't necessarily involved or as closely involved with some of the larger validator community. I think what surprised me since then is the fact that people have voiced concerns about the centralization of stake. I feel like I tried to bring up that conversation a few times, gently here and there, and it didn't seem to get a whole lot of interest then. But you know, now that people are seeing the stake distributions, and I think seeing, you know, how it's coming into practice, that it's gotten some more attention, and seeing people, you know, engage in that conversation with constructive ideas on how to address it feels pretty hopeful. But it was a surprise to see that level of engagement on the potential centralization of the stake.
You mean, so you did you expect the distribution to look kind of the way it looked, but your expectation was that people wouldn't be as concerned about it as some of the people are?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed like it wasn't a conversation that really people were engaging with prior to launch, but it seems like now that launch has happened, that it's one that, you know, a lot more people are engaging in, and feels like a really important conversation for people to engage in. That feels pretty hopeful. And, you know, leading up to launch, there are so many other priorities that I can understand why this may not have popped to the top of the list, especially with people, you know, trying to build systems that are secure, stable, and available.
Sure. Yeah, so for me, what was the most surprising by far was the amount of delegation that we've seen, considering that, as Hendrik said, we did not have a working wallet, and considering the fact that we launched with more than a year and a half later than expected. So considering these two facts, I was like, actually, okay, the weights delegated, we were expecting that. But we've actually seen a lot of other people delegate, make the effort to look at the software, delegate, download the binaries, or even install from source and delegate. Yeah, it was like super surprising. I think the fact that we put the slashing at 5% definitely helped. But even so, I didn't expect that we would see so much delegation, especially considering that neither AIB nor the Interchain delegated, or at least delegated significant amounts yet. So yeah, pleasantly surprised by that for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's been actually. Let's go to the point, Lorien. You mentioned the kind of weighing short term versus long term, and people making short term decisions. What were you specifically alluding to there?
Well, clearly, I think it's two issues that are, I think they're related. The first is that it's very, I think, token distribution, and I think this isn't necessarily a validator concentration issue. It's a token ownership issue, and I think that's going to that's obviously going to change really, really significantly over the next 6 months when trading is enabled. There were only 1,000 not ICO investors. So by definition, it's pretty concentrated. And I think that just what it looks like now in 6 months, and even the larger validators, are going to really change significantly once all that happens and we're at state or some sort of state with active trading. So I just don't think that, making significant moves in either the protocol, I'm going to talk my own perspective here a little bit, and around validator fees is necessarily smart to do a week after launch. And before at least token distribution, and before people are trading, and before it's on exchanges, and before exchanges have started validating, like there's just a whole host of things to happen where I would still consider the network an alpha, to use them, and it's just like it's not really live yet because no one can transfer tokens. So I just don't think that again, I have some pretty strong beliefs on this around validator fees and stuff like that, but like dropping fees to 0%. I just think that that's probably the wrong way to act this early on. And if fees eventually go to zero, they go zero. And if people only compete on price, well, then they can only compete on price. I personally think there's a whole host of off-chain considerations that people aren't thinking about. But I would just say, doing that a week after launch just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think definitely the fee level is validator economics, and fees are something very interesting to speak about. I mean, here's sort of a question also for the Tendermint team. I know some validators have voiced kind of concerns around that, that you have basically the Tendermint team running a whole bunch of, different validators on the side we tend to be all very low commissions. Can you guys comment on that, like Zaki and Gautier?
Is mine low commission? I don't think so. I'm like median.
No, yours like median. Yeah. That's true.
Like,
I mean, there's
I think a very conscious choice on my part, on Iqlusion's part, not to play hardball on fees right now.
Yeah.
For my side, I don't think our commission is that low either. I think we're at 9% right now. We cannot go at 0 because we are running on our own funds, obviously, and we don't have like deep pockets, so we can't really go to 0. I think 9% is the best we can do at the moment. But yeah, we want to go lower. We are like, as I said earlier, a small validator, and we are not funded by Tendermint or AIB. So I think this is very specifically about, like, maybe you're talking about Sika more specifically, but for Iqlusion and CastleNode and all the other AIB validators, our commission is not that low compared to the average.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I could be transparent about this. Yeah. Like the internal conversations about delegating AIB atoms are, we do intend, the Tendermint atoms are the intention is to start delegating them to some mix of employee validators, and then trying to increase the geographic decentralization of the network. Our biggest challenge right now is with people that we don't know personally and like don't know their setups personally. Like, how could we validate that we're actually like increasing geographic decentralization meaningfully? So it's a little bit of a challenge, and so we are taking it slow with the AIB atoms, but like that is the expectation of getting delegation from Tendermint is part of the thinking around a lot of these employee validators. But we also don't want to we don't want to perpetuate more centralization trauma on the network. So like we're being careful.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things that is a sort of interesting thing to ponder, if you look at a validator like Bitfish, so Bitfish starting like 4% fees now, right? And then they're very large validator at this point. So if you look at that, then the revenues from that are kind of decent revenues, not huge but decent. But of course, if you think of like, let's say Chris now, right, who has a small validator, that makes life pretty difficult, right? Because if there's a large validator with 4% fee who is a competitor, then it stands to reason that some people will say, hey, but why would I pay? Let's say I think you're charging 15% now. Why would I pay 15% if I can pay 4% somewhere else? And of course, if you don't have this massive size, then with 4%, you will never be able to have a kind of economically sustainable operation. Like, what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think the race to the bottom with fees is a dangerous road to go down, because I think at that point, people are going to start to make unsafe decisions when it comes to their network and their infrastructure, possibly to cut costs. And what I've seen, for example, I've been operating a live peer transcoder in the active set since last summer, and of course the networks are very different, but in terms of the economic behavior of the delegators, there's been somewhat of a race to the bottom with fees. And right now it doesn't matter because the penalties aren't as severe. So the race to the bottom really puts a focus on fees. And I think, as Figment was saying earlier, people then aren't aware of the other vulnerabilities and risks that are increasing by just going with the lowest fee validator, for example. And I think one of our jobs as a group of validators is to really provide the education to the delegators about what's important when it comes to choosing a validator. And it's not only the size of the stake the validator has, and it's not only how low the fees are. There are some other things to consider. I feel fortunate in my case that my big early delegation was from someone who knew me reputationally from other work I do in the space. So for a smaller person like me, I hope that that helps me essentially continue operating. But yeah, I think the race to the bottom with fees continues to provide an unsafe focus on the fees, and we really need to provide the education to show people that fees are only one component of a really important decision.
Yeah, so I think it's great. I think the larger question is, does the network, in a generic sense, want to have a set of non-atom holding independent validators participating in the network? I think that's, at the end of the day, the larger question. I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong question there. You may want all your validators to be large holders, actually. I don't know, but I think it's a reasonable question to ask, and the community should ask itself that. And I think the answer to that may determine somewhere where the fees go. I would just say, as my experience talking to at least some of the large token holders, if you made an investment in the ICO, whether you save 1 or 2 percentage points of a 10% or a 20% inflation rate is really irrelevant. Like, if someone's taking a 50% fee and a 5% fee, and that's of an inflation rate of 10 or 15 or 20, whatever it's going to be, but you haven't invested, so you can optimize your yield by a couple percentage points. It's not why you bought in the ICO. You bought because you hope to either hold long term or to have a quick flip or whatever reasons. So I just don't think that most of the large holders are optimizing for a few points of yield. That may happen in a year or two, but from my experience, it's about jurisdiction, operational competence, not being slashed, contracting, etc. So anyways, that's, maybe people are having a different experience, and maybe I've just talked to a small subset, but that seems to be like, if you're trying to do 3 or 4x on your token value, what do you care about a couple points? Really, you just want to worry not to be slashed. So I think that's where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the characteristics of Bitfish that's just interesting is that Bitfish is like, perhaps the first sort of external player, player that is both large and well-known in the wider cryptocurrency space, but is like external to the sort of fundraiser and original testnet Cosmos validator community that has really done well. So on one hand, I'm really happy that we've demonstrated that this is an open entry system, and a new player can effectively come in. On another hand, the other thing that I think is just going to be interesting is that we are going to see more and more big players from the wider economy come into the Cosmos network as validators, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays with the original validators.
Yeah, just jumping in here. Also coming to the point of the price war, the fee war. People might see Bitfish with their 4% commission rate and think they are up there just because of that. But I personally think it's because they have proven technical excellence in the game of stakes. So they have proven that they are able to adapt and provide a really stable service, and that in a just short time. And they are a well-connected actor in the system. If you look at them, one of the block explorers, you'll see that 76% of their bonded atoms come from a single wallet. So it's obviously not just the commission rate that puts them up there, but also the fact that they are so well connected, no people, no large holders. And I really hope that a lot of the smaller independent validators will not try to combat that by thinking lowering your commission is the magic solution to getting more delegations, but that they look at other ways to solve this problem. Like Lorien has mentioned, there's a lot of larger funds looking to diversify their delegations, but they need legal support, they need contracts, they need security, and that's what they are looking for. So I would rather advertise on these aspects than just lowering your fees, because in the end, this could be an operational suicide, because if you lower to 0%, at some point you'll have to go back up again, because a business at 0% is not sustainable, and you might lose people in that way. And also running at zero cost for, at the moment, an unlimited time incurs a lot of cost. Running a validator is expensive, as we all know. So I would rather keep my commission rate at a sustainable point and try to showcase my validator in other ways, because I think in the long run, this is going to be more sustainable. As Lorien said, currently we see a lot of emotional reactions, which are fully understandable, but we have to look further down the road, especially with transfers potentially being enabled and the ecosystem changing.
Yeah, and I think following on that comment, I think what will be interesting for me is when the number of smaller holders begins to increase too, because I think, what we've been talking about so far, the big holders who have done due diligence and understand, where they're putting the money and what they expect to get back on that money. But when you look at the Telegram group, there are a whole lot of people in there that may or may not do that diligence. So I think, again, it's going to be more and more important for us to educate the community on, how to choose a validator. Fees are one component, to your point, Hendrik. And,
yeah.
I also hope that, the motivations of the delegates over time shifts, because I think right now, the motivation of the early delegators is, largely financial. And I hope over time that, as people come to the community with other values, such as supporting decentralization, then, the values of the validator, as well as their, technical proficiency, operational proficiency, risk mitigation techniques, all those things, also comes into play and balances out the picture a little bit.
So you would say,
just one comment, because I think there is an important thing we haven't touched yet, and I think it's important to understand why people are reacting this way. For me, the biggest problem and the reason why I don't see the race to the bottom stopping at the moment is that the risk of not spreading your atoms, or the risk of choosing a lower commission validator, even if the setup is less secure, is not that high, right? Because the slashing is only 5% maximum because of Tombstone. So maybe one solution there would be to increase the slashing percentage for equivocation, because this is clearly incentivizing stronger setups. This will help people that have focused on security advertise their validators better, and this will also help combat the race to the bottom that we talked about. I know personally a lot of people, at least 2 or 3, that's a lot in the Atom community, that were planning to spread their delegation, but then they realized that the risk was only 5%, and they decided to delegate just to maybe a couple of validators, if not only one. I think the risk management would be much better if the risk was much higher. So yeah, that's also a point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I've actually also been surprised to see this 5% mark without a lot of community discussion, especially in the validator community before. I'm quite sad that it was set to 5%, because in my opinion, and I had a great conversation about this yesterday with some of the Berlin Tendermint team, I think for this slashing rate, the way is only going down because the large holders, who are obviously those with the most stake deciding in governance, will not want to increase the risk. I even see this number of 5% going down potentially, because as these actors control the network, they can drive this down to reduce their risk and make their setups cheaper, increase their yields, because the security of the network is not as important like in the short term. If you think about it, like looking, I mean, you mentioned before that people are looking at yields specifically in the beginning. And I think we need to really make it like stated that it's important that the slashing is here, because the slashing is the thing that gives the network the safety property. And I really fear that people might want to drive the 5% down, and those who are economically incentivized to drive it down are the ones making the governance decisions. So that's why I think setting 5% was a bit of a controversial decision, but I'm happy to discuss this here.
Well, let me give you what I think the competitive dynamics of this are, Hendrik.
Yeah.
So the competitive dynamics around the slashing rate is, okay, so right now, atoms, and I just did a blog post about this on the Iqlusion blog, but like atoms only collateralize the atom ledger. Like that's essentially, that's all they do. But the purpose of atoms is that they are supposed to be like, they're supposed to evolve into highly capital efficient collateral. And the number of things, like in order to increase the revenue that you earn for your collateral, you need to increase the number of things that you are potentially slashable for. And if the Cosmos Hub validators are not willing to, if like the atom distribution's governance is not willing to put their atoms at risk to earn more revenue, people like you and me will find a new token distribution that is willing to take on those risks in order to increase revenue, because what we're interested in being is operators that like maximize the assets under management, not just the appreciation, not just the yield on atoms, which like at the end of the day, at like infinity, who cares?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think you mentioned the most important point here being education, and I really appreciate that you already like took the initiative and started writing blog posts and already published one.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we do need to educate people on what atoms are and like how the revenue model of atoms for validators and for atom holders in general. Because if there isn't, you know, basically without slashing, there is no discounted cash flow. Without discounted cash flow, there is no value to atoms, which makes atoms no longer valuable as collateral, which defeats the purpose. But also creates a space in which something will use this technology to outcompete atom holders.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big topic to to come back to probably is like the economics of atoms. But maybe let's speak a little bit about the question of decentralization. What's the, what is the right way to think about decentralization? I mean, I've seen different things mentioned, right? Like, for example, one of the things could be that you look at it purely from a network resilience perspective, and you say, okay, if it's too concentrated, right? Let's say if just one validator goes down, or two or three, the network would halt, right? Like, you can look at it purely from that. You could look at it from a question of power, right? So that the decision making and the influence in the network is more dispersed. We could maybe look at it from a question of economics, that you have like a wider distribution of the wealth that's being generated here. How do you guys think about decentralization, and how would you rate the situation in that regard at the moment?
I mean, I think about it along the same vectors that you mentioned. For me, I mean, my interest in the entire, I guess, crypto ecosystem, community, whatever you call it, is just the decentralization of power. And, economics are tied very tightly to power. So, I mean, I guess I'm sensitive to the consolidation of power among a small group of validators, essentially, who are controlled by a small group of financial interests. Because then, to me, if that continues to happen, we're simply replicating the financial system that we have in today's world. And, tomorrow, 3 big banks could come by the 3 big validators, and, now we have a crypto network that's owned by, Citibank, Chase Bank, and Deutsche Bank. And, what's the difference there versus, me not necessarily, being able to get a good return on funds and, invested other ways through the traditional financial system. So I guess to me, I'm approaching it from somewhat of an extreme view, which is, we have to be careful because, my goal is to not replicate what we have in the traditional financial world here. And to me, that comes from, making, putting power in the hands of people who don't necessarily have it today. And, with that comes, economic incentives and economic distributions that aren't available to a lot of the world. So, that could be one extreme end of the spectrum, I guess. But, that's the lens that I view things through.
I have a lot of opinions on this, but I'm going to let other people go before I dominate the conversation.
Gautier, what are your thoughts?
Wow, so that's also like a very big topic. Okay, so first, to me, the good question is like whether decentralization is something that is desirable, and if yes, in what context? And then there is a question of, is decentralization possible in terms of capital and power, at least? So, for example, if we look empirically, in all free markets, the capital and power tends to centralize, and that's probably because there is a bell curve in everything, in talent, and there's also network effect, obviously. So in the case of Atom, we already see like really big centralization. We can hope it will improve. I'm not sure it will improve if we don't touch anything at the mechanism and incentive level. Yeah, so this is a complicated issue.
But you mean by centralization in atoms, you mean that the token holdings are concentrated?
Yeah, it's fairly concentrated, and even for like validators, because like right now transfers are not enabled, but Lorien mentioned that transfers are going to be enabled, and people are going to acquire atoms on exchanges. And exchanges are most probably going to enter the validation market, right? And we can hope they will offer to their customer the possibility to delegate to any validator. But what will most likely happen is that if you want to delegate from Coinbase or Kraken or any kind of exchange, you will have to go through their own validation service. And because you acquire the asset there, I fear that this is like a big vector of centralization, one of the big vector that we might face. So yeah, centralization is something that is very powerful. This is like gravity, and yeah, this is a big topic. So should we fight gravity? And if yes, why? But I don't have all the answer on that.
Yeah, I mean, let me just add a point here that might not be obvious to some listeners. I'm sure it's obvious to all of you guys, so you probably have all thought about it. But one of the massive advantages an exchange also has is that an exchange can allow you to stake your atoms and at the same time trade them, right? I mean, in the end, right, you deposit your coins with an exchange and there's kind of an IOU and people are trading the IOU. So now if I'm staking my atoms, right, I have to unbond it. So let's say I want to sell my atoms. Now it's a big issue, right? Because I have to think about when a transfer is going to be enabled, and I have to withdraw. I have to wait 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, I'm not earning money. Then I have to deposit them. So there's a lot of barriers. But if I just gave the custody of it to an exchange, the exchange can then sell it to somebody else. You know, the atoms always stay bonded. Ownership is transferred. And so they have a massive advantage also from a liquidity perspective. And so it will be very difficult, I think, actually, for independent validators. So it will be hard to see how they can kind of compete with that.
Okay, can I go now? So many thoughts.
Go.
All right. Okay. First thing first. On like the centralization of the token distribution, the most important thing to so where are we now? Where we are now, I'm actually really super happy where we are. I know a lot of things about the back ends of Certus 1, Chorus 1, Polychain. I know less about what Bitfish is actually doing on the back end, but if you look at and then I know about the Iqlusion back end. I know about the CastleNode back end. I know about lots of back ends on all the validators, and like almost every system is somewhat unique. And that is amazing for just like the BFT property of the system. Like we have probably the most diverse set of I'll also call it the Cryptium setup being pretty cool and different from everyone else's. So I just want to say, like, I think we have the most diverse set of sort of high-end validators of any network that's probably running on the face of the earth right now. Like enterprise, not enterprise, proof of stake, proof of authority, whatever. I think just like in terms of diversity, I think we're basically the most BFT system that has ever been deployed. Okay, so that's one thing. So I'm like happy with this. Second question is like, is the token distribution a problem? I would never have been okay with building this system if there was only ever going to be one hub. I think I think it is only a matter of time before one or more people try to do various forms of like a people's hub with a broader token distribution from get-go and try to compete for liquidity and connections and assets with the Cosmos Hub. And I think that will be ultimately the tension that maintains decentralization. The third thing is, I say this frequently, it's like, I don't actually care about decentralization. I care about a couple of properties. I care about social scalability. I care about Byzantine fault tolerance, and I care about censorship resistance. These are properties that decentralization.
What do you mean with social scalability?
Huh? Social scalability? Social scalability is basically there's a like, I don't agree with Nick Szabo on anything, but his writings on this are pretty good. It's basically like the property of making of finding a shelling point that excludes the smallest number of people. Like basically, can we create protocols and rules and governance structures in societies that the fewest people find objectionable? And so these are all properties that I think are really valuable. Systems that are highly concentrated and centralized will struggle with all of these things. but the ability of new token distributions and new hubs to be manifested with this technology will hopefully be the countervailing force to the centralizing pressures that exist in the world that we live in. And then the final thing is, yes, I think the exchanges getting into the staking business is going to be like a truly transformative thing. I think exchanges are going to offer some form of staking derivatives, probably within the next 12 months, certainly, probably potentially shorter. But there's also things we could do on the protocol level, like offer on-chain staking derivatives, which could make things fun and exciting and more interesting for us validators. So
yeah,
those are all. That's like a bunch of brain dump stuff. There's also more in my blog post.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea. I think some sort of on-chain, I mean, which you'll be able to do in Ethereum, right? Like, for example, on Ethereum, there was a bunch of Ethereum startups working on this exact problem. Right now, you're staking ETH, but you still want liquidity. So you had companies like, Vest, or before there used to be called One Protocol, that were basically working on this problem. And then Ethereum, you could use smart contracts to solve it. And in Cosmos, I think it would need some protocol changes, but I think that would absolutely be essential, that you can somehow still have liquidity without having to give up custody.
Yep.
So yeah,
I definitely have designs floating around my head, and I'm totally down to work with any validators who want to for how to do staking derivatives. We should probably deploy it in a zone first before we propose a hub upgrade.
I think we have spent countless hours in course one speaking about this topic, so we would definitely be interested in this.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot we can do here as validators to competitively respond to the pressures that we will invariably face.
So, anyone else want to weigh in on this? I mean, I wonder if it makes sense to speak a little bit about the topic of, and I think that's a much larger topic, and probably one that in the future we should just maybe spend a whole discussion on it. But it's like atoms. So like, what makes atoms valuable? Because you talked about, Zaki, okay, you will have the Cosmos hub, but then someone else can come and do another hub, right? And they can compete with it. And of course, that's true. But I think if you look at this model of, we have an internet of blockchains, many different blockchains, they connect to the Cosmos hub, and they have to route transactions through the Cosmos hub. I think for the transaction fees on the hub to become valuable, you do need to have some kind of, you need to have very strong network effects, right? You need to basically have that, okay, this hub is, it's just so much better to use this hub, and another hub can't really compete. And that then also basically the community of that controls the hub can increase the prices, above just the sort of subsistence level. And then of course that would make atoms valuable. So do you guys see that in a similar way, or do you guys see other drivers of the atom price?
As always, I'll let other people go.
Lorien, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit flippant, but I'm not. It's not apparent to me long term what will drive the value or not. I mean, I think this applies to a lot of networks, but I'm not sure at scale what will actually drive, except as maybe the piece of collateral. Like, I'm not sure if there's a whole ton of DApp usage in various zones and hubs where actual atom value derives from. I haven't seen anyone like explain it to me clearly enough, or a good expert, not to me, but make a general explanation of that. Don't know if anyone has any theories on that, but if you imagine the network 5 years from now with a whole host of applications using their own hub, etc., what is actually driving these atoms, the ones we're talking about now, and their value? I'm not sure I see it. So But
so you want me to go?
Sure. Why don't you give a shot at it? I'm sure you've thought about it much more than I have. So
Yeah, I've only been thinking about it for 3 years, so it's only it's not a new set of thoughts about why atoms are valuable. So here's how I kind of see this evolving. So the first thing to understand is the hub is not merely a message routing layer. It is actually a custodian. In its simplest form of the simplest form of IBC, the kind of the level of IBC that we can imagine deploying probably this year, the hub will at very least be the custodian and the record keeper for every asset that originated from one zone and then was transited to another zone. So at very least, the Atom network collateralizes that and should be able, in a competitive marketplace with other hubs, but should be able to collect revenue based on the asset, not so it's not my expectation is that the cash flows Atoms collect will be only marginally related to how much transaction throughput there is through the hub, and it will probably more be related to validator set coming to some sort of consensus on how much revenue that they need to secure all of these assets that they're securing on behalf of other networks. So that's sort of the first piece. And then this doesn't get into kind of like the potential for what our future protocol evolutions that I think would be in the interests of Atom holders as things evolve, both in terms of using Atoms as shared collateral across multiple zones, collateral for holding assets on other chains like a Bitcoin, a Bitcoin peg zone, etc. All of these other use cases, but basically the interests of Atom holders are going to be, or the interest of anybody who's trying to build the sort of idealized discounted cash flow based collateral, is to kind of keep expanding the number of cash flows that they're collateralizing with a common asset. And this will be, as I said, the upward pressure on slashing. Obviously this stuff is, it's all speculative, and it's all about the manipulation of these Schelling points, and it involves future protocol changes and technologies. But this is kind of the future that I expect to be building towards for the next forever. So
yeah, I mean, I'd love to add a bit on it. So I largely share this point of view. It's also interesting to think about so we have this Cosmos Hub now, and Zaki mentioned, okay, this is excellent, group of validators. I mean, there's also just an excellent group of token holders. I think, I know many Atom holders from being deeply involved in the Cosmos fundraiser, and I think that just the quality of the token holder is, I think, the highest of any blockchain. In terms of the average knowledge of blockchain, technical expertise, understanding of the space. So I think that's extremely encouraging. Now, let's say you have a new blockchain, you want to launch a new blockchain, and it would be you would probably want to have the Atom hub validators also validate that blockchain. And then there's a question, how is that going to work? I mean, it's of course a business opportunity for validators, but it may also be a business opportunities for Atom holders. Like you could see, for example, new tokens being created and some of them being airdropped maybe to Atom holders, or maybe shared security.
Or an interesting way in which validators might differentiate their delegation services is by their ability to do business development with new networks that are coming up and then airdrop not just to themselves, but to their delegators.
Absolutely.
That'll happen.
Yeah.
This is a complicated game. This is not chess where you move your fees around the board. This is a complicated, multi-dimensional playing field. In which like the avenues of procedure will be for years. But we have like degrees of freedom here that like are just like are large.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we had a discussion with Sunny, I think 1 week ago, and basically coined it as Atom is going to become a ticket, a membership ticket of the strongest validator and delegator union. And essentially what this means is that, so basically of the atoms, and then the most simple shell security model you can do is that you can be slashed for equivocation, like whatever the chain ID is, if it's reported on the hub. So not only for the chain ID of the hub, but if you double sign on another chain ID, you also get slashed on the hub. And so you don't need to have the protocol select which validators go and validate other zones. You can do that in a whole free market basis where each validator is free to go validate other zones. And as soon as their Tendermint private key starts participating in the consensus of this other zone, they are effectively, this other zone is effectively secured by the atoms that are collateralized on the Cosmos Hub. And over time, if these new zones that come in want to attract the most delegators, then they have to offer incentives to these validators and obviously to the delegators, because if you don't offer incentive to the delegators, they will switch to other validators that do offer these incentives to their delegators. So I think this was a very interesting discussion, and we should write a blog post on that. But this would definitely increase the value of Atom, in my opinion.
Write it under CastleNode.
No, it's we write it with Sunny, like share like Zaki and CastleNode.
Zaki and CastleNode, exactly.
Yeah.
I think Tendermint still has no opinions on the price of atoms, the value of atoms.
Yeah, and I also one way I've been thinking about Cosmos for a long time is just as basically a DAO. And if you look at the the DAO back then, what was its fatal flaw? I think one of its, I mean, there were a bunch of fatal flaws, but I think one of the fatal flaws was that it didn't have its own blockchain, right? It like lived on top of Ethereum, and then you had this divergence of interest between Ethereum and the DAO community. So having its own blockchain and like a strong basis, strong community and strong value is and having governance tools is like extremely great. And I've been following Tezos. I was always like, why is the governance not coming? I mean, they've finally had their vote, but it was slow for there to be on-chain governance votes. So I'm super encouraged that we've already had now the first vote in progress from the Harvest proposal, and that the government's already happening. So I think that's extremely encouraging, in my view.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to go with governance. That's a whole other ball of wax on the governance side. I think we're still extremely immature on that side. So, right now it's essentially a plebiscite, right? Nothing's necessarily binding. So it'll be interesting to see when we have the first kind. Everything's pretty low stakes right now. So I'm fascinated to see, like, none of the proposals, the two of them, I think that's what they are right now, are all that controversial. They kind of make sense, or they aren't like horrible. So I'm wondering what happens when you have the first, rollback type vote or something like that. What happens? That'll be sort of the first real test for the community.
I mean, what happens when Trump gets elected president of Cosmos?
Right. So, yeah.
No gods, no kings, no masters.
Right.
Anything else you guys want to talk about that would be useful to address at this point?
I think governance is a really interesting topic, and maybe that's a topic for a separate conversation. But I do think there's enough to get into, and I would love to continue this conversation along those lines, maybe at a different time. Because I do have to go now. But thanks for including me, and talk to everybody soon.
Thanks so much for joining, Chris.
Bye.
Maybe one concluding word, because I really want to insist on one point, because when we talked about the exchanges coming to the validators market, I think we should really approach these from a risk management perspective, right? So we have whales, which is the problem that brought us here today. And the reason why we are seeing some centralization, I think it's better than what could be expected, but we are still seeing some centralization. And why we can fear some centralization with the exchanges is because the slashing rate is very low. That's my opinion. I think exchanges, if the risk of getting slashed was very high, they would have to diversify and spread that delegation. Or at least we can expect that they would be more incentivized to do it than if the slashing rate is very low. So yeah, that's one point I would like to raise. I can understand why we launched with a low commission slashing rate. Sorry, because we didn't really know how it is going to go. But now that we've seen it's stable and nobody got slashed, which is surprising, but that's also good. I think we can start considering maybe increasing the slashing ratio.
Yeah, I agree. Also on the point of exchanges joining, the point of, like, if we say exchanges allow their users to delegate and bond their atoms with different validators, this still is not a clear mitigation for the risk in the long run. Especially like liveness wise, yes it is. If they don't delegate to a single validator that's exchange run, that will like give us more stability on the liveness side, as obviously more validators would have to go down in order to hold the network. Still, we have the feature of instant redelegation. So if an exchange wanted to start malicious actions on the chain, they could immediately redelegate all of their funds or all of their customers' funds to a single validator and use that validator to double sign, do whatever they want, depending on how much network power they control. So I think that here, things like governance are super important. Things like increasing the slashing amount are really important, as also you, Zaki, mentioned. I think these have been like really good arguments, and I'm really looking forward to the education of people, because a lot of these concepts you put out really depend on people understanding what's happening there and them not being too short-sighted. And I think if we all work together to educate well and help like make the image of what an atom is and what the meaning of an atom is more clear, then we'll see this ecosystem thrive. Because like for us validators, it's not just about validating and providing just the best setup. It's also about growing the ecosystem, because making the cake bigger gives us all a bit larger piece. And I think these kind of contributions will be what we are all focusing on, and how we can help make like Cosmos and the whole interoperability ecosystem thrive.
Yeah. And, you know, just that like Hendrik is here at all is like one of the things I'm happiest about this year.
Thank you, Zaki.
So I'm always thankful for Hendrik and Leo.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Glad to have you here as well. Like, you are the one who like has been breaking his head for years.
Yes, absolutely. But like the fact that you were able to break into the community is just like is just like one of the things that has made me happiest about launch. I wasn't sure. I wasn't really sure that that Certus one would end up in the top set of validators, up until until this week, and it's been incredibly gratifying to me that happened.
Thanks. We are also very happy to see so much community support, especially seeing so many delegations, not just the pure amount, like in terms of atoms, but also the number of delegations, which really shows the support of the community. Like, we're super glad about this.
Yeah, no, it is.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I would say let's wrap up here. I think we've covered quite a bit, and I'm sure there will be plenty of occasions for like follow-up conversations from this. But I think this was fun, and I think this was useful. Yeah.
Thank you for organizing, and maybe we should try to make it a regular, monthly, bi-weekly. I don't know, something like that. I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Also invite more validators to like have a more diverse set on these calls.
Yeah,
Right.
no, totally.
Yeah, we should rotate, not always the same validators.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Thank you for
I would totally
organizing.
agree. Okay, thanks guys. See you.
Take care.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.